PCI Pharma Services, your world-leading CDMO.
So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar is on pre-IND and distribution strategies, where we're ensuring efficient clinical studies. In today's session, we have PCI subject matter expert, Rupert, who's our Director of Global Specialty Logistics, and Sharlett Burgess, who is our Senior Director of Quality Operations, will share their insights on optimizing pre-IND and regulatory readiness, leveraging Canadian CDMO capabilities, global distribution strategies, and an effective risk mitigation. We would like to encourage you to actively participate today, so please do feel free to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions throughout the presentation. To ensure a smooth experience today, we do kindly ask that you mute yourself while Zach and Sharlett are presenting. And with that, Zach, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. We just have the agenda up here. We'll go into my first topic here. About distribution, import, exports, and tariffs. So I know tariffs are a fun topic right now, so I'll discuss that here towards the end. But really, first, I want to go over just kind of the global depot strategy we have and kind of seeing what the outlook looks like right now for all countries. So I'm going to show a map here soon that's going to kind of go through and say, like, kind of like a stoplight walkthrough of each country. You know, green countries, very easy to get things in and out of the country for clinical supply. Amber countries, you know, take a little bit of logistics framework, and then red countries are a lot longer lead times, take a little bit harder to get into. If we look at this global depot strategy, right, just based off our previous experience of where we're going to, a lot of the countries are pretty easy to go to, good infrastructure in place, import permit timelines are very low, and then you look at more of like the yellow countries that, you know, Egypt, Mexico, things of that nature that take a little bit more setting up to do. But they aren't as hard as those red countries, which, you know, like Brazil and some of the South American countries along with China, that take some significant infrastructure to kind of set up and things needed to go into those countries. But today I want to talk a little bit more about the requirements to go into Canada from an import-export perspective. So we're looking into going into Canada. There's some regulatory requirements for imports and exports. Typically, this big things are the documents that are included there below. You know, the bill of landing, the Canada custom invoice, and then IND number and end use letter. Obviously, IND number is needed for U.S. trials, and the end use letter is required as well going into the U.S. But it's kind of the nice thing to have going into Canada. What the two bullet points at the top really talk about is the Annex A to be filled out when importing in Canada. To give that notification to Health Canada that this drug is coming in. And then I'm going to go through a little bit of a couple of those supply chain scenarios for importing into Canada. So here's some examples of that supply chain requirements importing into Canada, a couple of different scenarios. So importing into a drug with an approved IND, one pre-IND status, kind of waiting for that approval, and then anything that kind of just goes into Canada for distribution throughout Canada in scenario 3. Most important here, obviously, there's going to be your bill of landing, your packing slip, your customs invoice for everything. And then there's certain things that would be nice to have and some things that are required going into Canada. For that scenario 1, that'd be like an IND number and use letter, the no objection letter from Health Canada. And that's really only required if it's actually going into Canadian markets. So the no objection letter comes from Health Canada as it approved to kind of, you know, that may proceed as a trial in Canada. Importing pre-IND status is very similar in a way, and then that Annex A must be filled out. So that's something that can say to Health Canada, you know, this is going to come into Canada for packaging, labeling activities, then it's going to go back out once the IND number is available. It's kind of tracking of that material going in to make sure it's not going out to Canada sites because you want to need that NOL in that case. So those are the options going through from a, you know, supply chain requirements going into Canada. What's really important, though, is understanding and working with your importer of record to see what the requirement is at that time during import. Now let's shift gears a little bit about tariffs. So tariffs have changed a lot for the U.S. There's been a ton of things going on there. It continues to change. Recently, as of yesterday, there has been a new inquiry to inquire about more pharmaceutical tariffs. That's, it's under a 180-day investigation. November 1st, we'll see what that investigation looks like. And then December this year, we'll come out with, this is what the new tariff is going to be to pharmaceutical goods, and it won't be applied until 2026. So there is a little bit of a gap timing of what it looks like, but this is a good picture of what it looks like today and what kind of, what has progressed so far. So there's two things to note when it comes to tariffs. There's been a lot of different annexes out there thrown out, different things what to know. The two things that are most important are on the executive orders is Annex 1 and Annex 2. Annex 1 describes countries that have a varied rate of reciprocal tariff. So if your country of origin on your invoice is an Annex 1 country, there's going to be different tariff rate applied to that. And that's what I'm kind of talking about here with the varied rate based on Annex 1. The most important piece is that Annex 2. Annex 2 of that executive order calls out the individual HTS codes that are exempt from any reciprocal tariffs. So if you look at Annex 2, it's about a 37-page document. It goes through, okay, 3004.90 is exempt, and it goes each one of these HTS codes. A lot of things for pharmaceuticals are exempt. So be key to know what pharmaceutical HTS code you're going to be using on your commercial invoice to know if it's exempt. So if you look at these top countries here, there was different implemented tariffs at different times, March 6th, April 5th, reciprocal tariffs, and probably the most popular one that's been talked about is China, because it varies totally depending on the product. Now, if you're shipping from China as your country of origin, and it's going into the US, and it's on Annex 2, then there's just a 20% total tariff rate that applies for pharmaceutical goods. Similar to Canada, it's 25%, and Mexico's 25%. There's a little asterisk here because there's also something called the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement that if origin can be traced back to any of these countries in North America, no tariff would be applied. Now, you have to fill out a USMCA statement upon import to do that, but we've been very successful at doing so, and you wouldn't have any tariff applying to any product that's kind of made holistically in the US or North America. So I'll go through the last example here on the next page, kind of showing those lanes, and then we'll take some questions. But I think the main thing to note here now is if it's a pharmaceutical product, China's really the main impacted country coming into the US. And the other countries can be exempt 90% of the time. The other thing to note is that there has been some companies going about importing with the prototype exemption. So something to call out and something to look into when you're importing into the US. If you import a clinical trial under prototype, which you can do, it would have no tariffs be applied to it. There's certain things that you have to qualify for to be considered a prototype, but we can walk through that, or I can follow up with folks if they're interested later, but there is some ways around these tariffs. If we look at some tariff examples, so just to kind of put that that last table into kind of a chart mode here, it gives a good representation of what it looks like. So, China, 20% based tariff based on country of origin. Canada, you could go 0% if you have the USMCA statement. Same thing with Mexico. EU, another country where a lot of things come from. There's, a 10% tariff on all other countries right now. But if you're using a product that is in Annex 2, it will be 0%. A lot of more complicated supply chains. So say your drug was actually made in Germany, went to China for packaging and labeling, and then to the US, you would still see a 0%. Even though it came from China, your country of origin would be Germany. So there's a lot of different things there to just be keen on what your supply chain origin is and what that chain of custody looks like. But you can work it a couple different ways to get it into the US to try to relieve the tariffs as much as possible. The other thing I will say is that it will change again. It definitely will change again, like I alluded to earlier, by the end of this year, of what it will be applied to everything. So what we're hearing is it could be an update to Annex 2, which is all those codes I talked about, where we could remove all those pharmaceutical codes. Then we would go back to the original 145% from China, for example, or these varied rates based on the Annex 1 countries. So that's a quick overview of what the tariffs look like here. I'm going to pause there before we move on to Sharlett's questions to kind of talk through any questions we have the audience might have.
Please do feel free to take yourself off mute if you wish.
I had a question. If your drug substance came from China and you imported it into Canada for drug product manufacturing, and then you imported your drug product tablets into the US, your country of origin on your drug product is Canada, and that's what you're importing in as that sort of classification. So the import from China into Canada, I'm assuming, would have whatever the tariff from in Canada is for Chinese made goods, but from Canada to the US when it is in a drug product formulation would be the Canada tariff. Is that correct understanding?
Yeah, it depends where you claim country of origin, because that counts as a substantial transformation. So when you go under a substantial transformation, you claim different origin. So you could claim Canada in that aspect and then file for a USMCA, and then you could get a partial relief of that tariff based on how that USMCA is filed. That's the best way to go about it in that scenario.
Do you have resources on how to go about filing the USMCA? Is it a separate memo that you ship with, or is there like an application you have to complete?
It's not. So there's not an official form for USMCA. Now, we have guidance of this is a template that we like to use, and that can be submitted with each shipment over customs, or it could be a blanket shipment over a period of years of a statement. So yes, we have a basic formula for that, and what that looks like that can be shared as well, because it is good information to use, especially when you're looking at things that have kind of multiple parts. Some, drug substance from China, but drug product from Canada, and it shows you how to fill that out as well.
Okay, thank you.
How do you know what counts as a substantial transformation? Is something like a fill finish where you're just putting the drug substance into a vial that you could still claim the drug substance manufacturing as country of origin, or does that count as substantial?
Counts as substantial there, as long as it goes into a completely different form. The best way to kind of advise that is, if it's anything, secondary pack and label, you want to consider a secondary or substantial transformation. But if you were doing even primary packaging, you can consider that a substantial transformation. So it's kind of at that line where you would make that determination. Any other questions?
Hi, this is Lisa. My question is, you said that you guys have some guidances for using prototype. So can you share some more information on that? Like what does PCI, what are PCI's recommendations, and can you also receive any type of product that would be under prototype, or are there certain limitations for PCI to receive under prototype?
There's not any limitations as long as it qualifies for prototype, which I can share. It's like a 6 questionnaire of how we would import under prototype, pretty standard. A lot of companies have been doing this a long time to import their clinical trials as prototype. So it has been out there before. So I can share that documentation with you just to see how we go through, this is what we check by, this is what we'd say, yes, you qualify as a prototype, and how you would fill that out on your commercial invoice, because you would still call out the normal HTS code, but then you would call out the 98017 prototype code on the bottom, which would indicate that it's prototype, and that's how we would clear it through customs. So there is, it's pretty straightforward process, but I can share that form with you.
Great. And then just one more follow-up. So are you saying that it is not typical now to request a CBP ruling to use prototype, or is it still recommended to request the CBP ruling to use prototype?
No, so we haven't had to get the CBP rolling for prototype in the past 2 or 3 months. It hasn't been something that's been pushed forward, anything like that. We've been successful doing that across all of our U.S. sites, importing under prototype when it deemed necessary.
And is that for both drug substance and drug product?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, hi, I have a question here. I'm with the prototype code, I heard that once you get something into the country, into the US, let's say it's coming from China to the US and you're getting it into the prototype code and you're in a depot in the US. I heard that with the prototype code, you're restricted to re-export. Let's say you're labeling in the US and you want to send it to another depot in Europe, or re-export it back to another country. Is it true that the prototype code limits you from doing that?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't limit you
Okay.
to do that. You could, it's really just the classification for when it comes in, and you have to keep records for a certain period of time that, you know, this is a prototype and it's going to be used. But you can also show that it's went out of country, still fall under those guidelines.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions there before I move on to Charlotte's piece?
All right, so thanks, Zach, and hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Sharlett Burgess, and I'll be taking a few minutes to go over some pre-IND information around the pre-IND strategy, what it is, the process, and some key considerations. So let's get started first by understanding IND submission. So when a sponsor is ready to transition from a lab research to in-human trials, an investigational new drug application must be submitted to the FDA for approval. An approved IND is a regulatory requirement for starting clinical trials in the US. It is recommended to have a pre-IND meeting with the FDA. This provides early regulatory feedback that helps to mitigate the risk of clinical holds when the IND application is submitted. Upon submission, the FDA will review the IND application within 30 days to assess safety for human subjects. Well-prepared submission reduces delays and ensures smooth transition in clinical trials. It is important to note that during the 30-day review period, the CTM cannot be packaged or labeled in the US. The importance of a pre-IND strategy, why it matters. A pre-IND strategy allows companies to prepare and manage clinical trial materials efficiently while awaiting authorization to proceed with human clinical studies. This approach reduces first patient in timelines by up to 6 to 8 weeks, accelerating the path for clinical trials. By leveraging a Canadian CDMO, companies can label and package IMP during FDA's 30-day IND review period. So companies are able to deliver faster clinical trial initiation and have reduced regulatory bottlenecks. So let's talk around how a Canadian CDMO can help to accelerate timelines, how it works. So while awaiting an FDA clearance, sponsors can import, label, and package clinical materials in a GMP certified facility in Canada. Once the IND is approved, that would be day 31, the pre-labeled products are ready to be shipped immediately to the US investigator sites. This parallel processing that I'm talking about eliminates unnecessary downtime and keeps studies on track. You can see from what I'm sharing is that this approach will shorten clinical supply timelines while maintaining regulatory compliance. So let's take a look at a timeline for an IND and just, call out exactly where the IND, pre-IND strategy fits in. So on my far left, where we have day 0, this is where you are submitting your IND application and your 30-day review period would begin. But it's really during that day 1 to 30, while the FDA is reviewing the IND that you've submitted, where they are looking at, the safety and doing the risk assessment, that simultaneously in Canada, you can have your drug being imported, packaged, labeled, and stored in a secured facility in Canada until you are approved with your IND, which would be day 31. So day 31, you would be automatically approved if you have not received any, clinical holds or there are any issues or comments, questions coming back from the FDA. Now those pre-packaged materials are ready for shipment. So again, first patient in, which is the main benefit of this strategy, first patient in is reduced by 6 to 8 weeks. So let's look at a couple of considerations or risk mitigations. So what to keep in mind. So first one is the regulatory and compliance piece. So it's important that any packaging and labeling is done according to the FDA guidelines. And as far as import, export logistics, some of the things that Zach just mentioned, that you have all of your documents available so that you will have that seamless material movement. Annex A, or Guide 0067, is important here because it is required to notify the FDA if you are bringing in importing product into Canada 10 days prior, and again 10 days after when you're ready to export. So as far as risk management, while it's unlikely that you're going to not be approved for your IND, the prepackaged material, if you are not approved, cannot be used in the United States. So in order to ensure that that's not the case, and in the times that I've been working in this area, about the number of times that we've done pre-IND for various customers, I haven't had that situation where an IND was not approved and where prepackaged material was not able to be sent to the US upon approval of the IND. But to have solid safety profile data, careful planning, and open communication with the FDA is essential to reduce clinical hold risk. Again, shortening clinical supply timelines while maintaining regulatory compliance. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is we have about 4 or 5 frequently asked questions. I'd like to read those questions and provide the response, and then right after I'm finished, if you have any additional questions, then we can take those questions at that time. So question number 1 is, I have an IND application and have an IND number. Can I package and label my material in the US? So unfortunately, the answer to that is no. If you filed your IND and received your IND number, you will still have to wait until day 31 to package and label your material in the US. The FDA will not allow for material to be packaged and labeled without an approved IND. Now, on that note, there are certain circumstances that do allow for the importation of the CTM into the US. However, IND application must be filed and there must be an IND number. And in that circumstance, you still have to wait to package and label your drug. You can bring the drug in, but you can't package and label until the IND is approved. All right. Question number 2. If my company has not filed an IND application, can I still move my CTM into Canada for packaging and labeling? So the term pre-IND is very broad. So it really refers to any time prior to you receiving having an approved IND. So whether you have submitted your application, whether you have an IND number, or whether you just haven't even submitted, all of that constitutes pre-IND. And your product can be imported into Canada in any of those times for packaging and labeling. And the reason for that is because there is no mention of IND approval or IND number on Canadian import documents. So it is really just a way to leverage and allow that time while you're waiting for IND approval to begin to package and label your product. Question number 3, are there any risks involved with packaging and labeling CTM before receiving an IND approval from the FDA? And then the second part of that question is, what happens if the FDA does not approve the IND? So in terms of risk, the risk of packaging and labeling for pre-IND is quite low because the sponsor is simply reporting the data that has been collected on the molecules. So if the sponsor has solid safety data and promising outcomes from their test, they will have a good idea as to whether or not the IND submission will be approved. If the FDA does not approve, then we would hold that product, either destroy the product or and have a certificate of destruction that we would have for our records to show full traceability of the product coming and what happened to that material if it wasn't then sent back to the US. And we can also hold the product until, whatever the issues or questions, comments that came back are addressed, and perhaps that material can then be available for shipment. So question number 4, how does Canada control entry of pre-IND CTM? So we talked a few times about Annex A and the Guide 0067. And really, that is the way Health Canada gets visibility to what product is coming in and also when that material leaves. So there is a requirement to notify them 10 days prior and also 10 days before you export the drug into the US. All right. Then lastly, is an IND only applicable in the US? And the answer there is yes. So an IND is only applicable in the US. In Canada, investigational drug, they are approved by Health Canada via a clinical trial application or CTA. Once the application is deemed acceptable, a no objection letter will be provided, an NOL, and that would be the equivalent to an IND approval in the US. So where US is time-based, after 30 days, the 31st day, if you haven't heard anything back, you're approved. In Canada, you would need to receive a no objection letter to know that you have been granted approval to proceed with your trial. All right. So at this point, I'm going to pause and open up for some questions. If you have any questions, please let me know.
So Sharlett, there are a few in the chat. Did you want me to read them to you?
Please, I can't see
okay.
them, yes.
So one here is, can the same activities be performed in the US pending IND approval?
The answer to that is no. You cannot package and label in the US without an IND approval. So the same activity that Canada would be able to do for you would not be able to be done until the IND is approved.
Can you please cite the regulation that comes from?
I can't cite the regulation for that. Similar to Canada, we cannot proceed to pack and label without authorization from a no objection letter. And in the US, the sponsors are not able to package and label. I don't know, Zach, if you have.
It's an import guidance. So yeah, we can't import it under that, right? We need an approved IND to get it through customs. So that's typically where it holds up. The only way to do it in the US is to utilize an FTZ, bringing it in there without the IND approval, which at that point in time, you're kind of skipping customs altogether to go into a free trade zone, foreign trade zone, if you will. That's really what it is. So it's just a customs broker that would flag it if it didn't have the IND. It goes through the ACE system and will put it on hold if that IND was not active.
Okay, so I think there's some nuances to this. And I think that we're getting confused what we can do if the CTM were to be manufactured in the US and when you can pack and label versus importation of a CTM before or after the IND. So we need to definitely verify this from a regulation base because I think it's a bit confusing to say that you can't pack and label after you've submitted an IND in the US. Secondly, I would be cautious to say when your IND is approved, it's not really ever approved, it's cleared to proceed.
Right.
So just those bits of information.
Yes, thank you.
So I guess to tack onto that, Zach, there was a question here about what are the advantages to package and label in Canada versus utilizing PCI Rockford's free trade zone when pending IND approval?
Well, it just depends. It depends on the global strategy of it and if you want to utilize an FTZ or not. Typically with the FTZ, it's a little bit more complicated from an import perspective, just with the broker and the FTZ documents. So if you're going into the US from an import perspective, you don't have the IND cleared yet, or you want to do some packaging label work, you could bring it into the FTZ. Your broker will have to work with our FTZ team to create that entry, clear that, import it at that time through an FTZ, certain forms that we have in place. And then once it's time to actually get it out of the FTZ, then you have to go through that formal import process. Where it clears it up going into Canada pre-IND is you don't need any of those things. So you could go directly into Canada, do your pack and label, and then wait for that day 31 and send it directly into US for distribution. So that's kind of the advantage there. You can streamline that timing a little bit with not having to deal with as much import-export.
And then there's another question here, I think that might have answered it, but just to be clear, during the IND review period, can the foreign-made IP be labeled inside a free trade zone within the US without regulatory impact? So I think that was answered.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Okay. There's another one here. Are there other countries that are recommended for pre-IND packaging?
Canada's probably the least restrictive, because if you look at, if say we look at EU or something like that, there's some different things there that would happen just with own regulations going in there, not to mention some VAT tax imports and things like that nature. Really that IND obviously only applies to the US, so anywhere outside of the US you could do that packaging and labeling work, but it depends on your supply chain and how that would look. So typically if you're saying your drug is manufactured, say in China or something like that, and you want to get it closer or this side of the globe, you could bring it into Canada as a strategy or use an FTZ to start to stage that for trials in the US or Canada.
Okay. Another question here, can you import fully packaged and labeled drug into the US prior to an IND filing?
Only if it's going to be going into an FTZ.
Okay. Is an NOL required for pre-IND packaging and labeling?
That an NOL is only required if the drug is intended to be used in Canada.
Okay. Can you import IMP under partial clinical hold? Looks like there's an answer here in the chat. It says yes, you can.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you import bright stock into US prior to IND submission?
Bright stock. Yeah, I mentioned that there are circumstances in which bright stock can be imported. Those are when you have applied for an IND and also when there is an IND number. However, it still has to be kept as and not packaged and labeled. The bright stock can come in, but you're not really doing anything with it until you're cleared for processing.
And I do have a hand up here. Did you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question, or was it answered?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, now very good. Okay, when you talk about clinical trial materials, you talk about the drug substance or the drug product. Tell me this first.
We're talking
drug
about
product or drug substance when you talk about the CTM.
CTM is clinical trial material, so that would be the material that's ready to go into use for the trial.
Oh, so drug product formulated.
Yes.
Okay, so in this case, that means if I made the drug substance, that means the API in Canada, can I let them ship into US and use a US CRO to formulate them, to manufacture them into drug product? That means to manufacture into clinical drug materials. And without, seems now I know, or we can't label and package until the FDA have the no objection letter or 30 days after 30 days, no objection, and then we can label and package. It's something like this, right?
Okay, so I'm not sure I got all of that, but from I think what I heard is are you manufacturing the drug in the U.S. or is the drug the bright stock?
Manufacture the API. That means the material, the drug material, not the. We have to drug material have to be formulated into drug product. That means clinical trial material. I never hear that term, but now I hear that term. And okay, so we manufacture the drug API, drug substance in the Canada. Can I let the Canada CRO ship into US for manufacture the drug product for clinical trial?
Yeah, I mean, you can.
I think so.
Yeah, it depends on what you call it out on your end use letter. So for requirements in the US, you'll also need your end use letter. So you're calling out what you're going to do with that product as it goes through. So then you give it a distinction code. If it's going to be eventually for human use or anything like that, it'll get flagged for an IND perspective. But if it's for the processing, R&D perspective, testing, things of that nature, you wouldn't need that IND, but you need to call it out on the end use letter as one of the customs documents that's coming into the US. That's separate from what it would be in Canada, right? So that's a little different, but then to the US, that's how you would go about it. It would just need to be called out in the end use letter, what you're doing with that and for what final purpose is that. Okay.
Another question is, if I manufacture drug API, active pharmaceutical material, API, ingredient, API in China, can I ship it from China, gather them from China into Canada, and then use the Canada CRO to formulate and manufacture the drug product? That means CTM. Can I do that?
Yeah, you would need Canada approval to do that, depending on where the final dosage form is going in. If it's just going to manufacture in Canada and then you're sending it out to the US, it's different than if it was going into the Canadian market. So there's two distinctions there. If it's going to go to the US, yes, you can do it that way without many additional approvals, right? So the final dosage form would come into the US. If it was going into Canada, then that's when that NOL piece would come into play.
Oh. So in this case, why we think about, so either we manufacture the CTM in Canada or in China, we can, based on what you tell us, we should not be able to label and package them before the R&D to have a no objection in the 30 days.
Yeah, so you can package it in Canada. That's the benefit of that, right? Before an IND is issued, if your destination is the US. If your final destination is going to be Canada for clinical trial or where that distribution is, you would need the no objection letter for Canada. Two separate things needed. The IND is the approval for the US, the NOL is the approval of kind of that equivalent in Canada. So you could do that. You could bring it in to Canada and do the packaging and labeling as a pre-IND, as Sharlett spoke about, and then send it to the US. It just depends on where that final drug is going to be distributed at.
Oh, if I understand that, English is my second language, I may not be. If I understand it now, so if I manufacture the CTM, I always, because R&D they call the drug substance DS, drug product DP. They always, the DP is exactly the CTM you termed. I never heard, but now I heard. Okay, and if I manufacture the CTM in Canada, I have an advantage that I can make the drug product label, the CTM label and package before the US IND, no objection in 30 days. Is that
for the US, it would just be the IND. There wouldn't be no objection letter for the US, but yes, right? You could do the manufacturing in Canada and then send it through there.
Okay, but if I package the drug substance in US, I have to wait until 30 days until no objection. Or I also can package it, the package and label and package it before the no objection.
I'm just wondering if we can maybe take this conversation offline, just to be cognizant of time, and we do have some other questions that are coming in. Would that be okay?
All right.
Thank you. I appreciate your engagement. Absolutely. So I do see that there are a couple of other questions in here, but realizing that we only have a few minutes left, do we maybe want to answer these separately, and we can send the questions and answers along with the recording? Would that be okay?
All right, to me, everything, okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. So just to close out today, probably should turn on my video there for you guys. So thank you very much, Zach and Sharlett, for your time and your expertise today. Everything that you guys shared was great, and we had some really great engagement, so I do appreciate that. And thank you to all of you for joining us. I know, it's 45 minutes out of your day. We do really appreciate you joining us today and asking your questions. Like I said, we will make sure that any questions that were unanswered get answered after today's webinar. And this webinar was recorded, so that will be shared with all of you in the next coming days, along with the Q&A. So we hope this session gave you some actionable insights to help streamline your clinical trial planning and navigate global supply chain complexities. We will be having, I wanted to bring your attention to, I'm missing my thing here. Sorry, I wanted to bring your attention to an exciting event that we have coming up on June 11th. You can see on the screen, we will be having a Canadian open house event at our Burlington facility. This will allow individuals to come see our site, meet our team, and just enjoy some lunch and some snacks. So we do want to invite all of you out to that. Invitations will begin within the next week or two. So please keep an eye on your inbox and submit your registration. We would love to see you all there. That will be a drop-in session, so you can come anytime between 10 and 3 to the site, and we will be doing some rotating tours as well. And then finally, if you can just skip to the next slide for me, please. So finally, I just want to invite you to explore our expertXchange platform on our website. You can access it by simply scanning that QR code, and you can see a plethora of information in there, content, articles, white papers, webinar recordings, just a great resource area for any information that you might be looking for. And then I just want to thank you guys for attending and for your participation. We would love to see you all at a future webinar that is coming up. We will keep you all posted on that schedule. And again, thank you for your engagement today. I wish you all a very good rest of your day.
The science, the skill, and foresight that drives the delivery of life-changing therapies. We are your world-leading CDMO. This is expertXchange. Together, delivering life-changing therapies. Let's talk future.